started. What were you doing before the war started?
I was here,
In Watsonville?
right this same place.
In the same house, exactly?
While I was going to school then,
You were going to
you
school.
know, yeah. And in my sophomore year, I joined the National Guards. They were in Salinas. And then we had 3-year hitches. You know, you signed up for 3 years. Well, in 39 and 40 was my first hitch. So I signed up for another hitch. You know, I was young and I liked it and everything. So I stayed with the National Guard. And then in 40, they changed because they knew that the war was coming and we were going to be, well, it was on then, but we were going to be involved. So they were getting us prepared for the future. We didn't know it. So we got shipped from here. We were, when I joined the National Guards, we were the 40th Tank Company in the 40th Division of the National Guards. Well, when they decided that they're going to send us into the regular army, they made us into a battalion. See, we were a company, and you got to have 3 companies to make a battalion. So they took our battalion, our company from Salinas, designated it C Company, and from Brainerd, Minnesota was A Company, and from St. Louis, Missouri was B Company. And that was the 194th Tank Battalion. And then we went to Fort Lewis for training. And we shipped out of here in February of 42. I mean of 41. And then we were up there, and they were slated, the 194th were slated to go to the Philippines. And 3 days before they were shipped out, I was transferred. I was transferred to go to Officers Canada School. So I was on rationing quarters with what they call the 756 Tank Battalion. And they were stationed up there in Fort Lewis with the 3rd Division. And we used to go out to Area 39 and do our practicing and everything. But I didn't have nothing to do because I was on rationing quarters. I didn't have any duties of any kind, no guard or anything. And I was a sergeant, buck sergeant. And I got tired of just sitting around doing nothing. And I don't drink beer, so the only thing you can do is go to the PX and drink beer. So I was out. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, I went down to the motor pool, and the sergeant down there, Master Sergeant Hudson, he was in charge of the motor pool of this 756. And I asked him, I says, can I help in any way? Well, he says, what can you do? Well, I says, not much. You know, I didn't have any administrative knowledge. And I didn't go to college because right out of high school I quit.
Yeah.
I didn't have money. In those days, you know, you didn't have money to go to college. It was a luxury to go to college. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, I went into the 756 Tank Battalion, and when we went to Fort Lewis, why, 3 days before I was slated to go, they knew that I wanted to go to college and my grades were good and everything, so they appointed me to go to this Fort Knox, Kentucky. That's the Armored Force headquarters. And they were training all the men over there for future officers because they knew they needed a lot of manpower. So I didn't know it, but I says, okay. So they sent my records and everything to Fort Knox. And I'm waiting up in Fort Lewis for my orders to go to Fort Knox. Well, the Japs hit in Pearl Harbor in 41, and then you're not anymore on rationing quarters. You're assigned to whatever outfit you're with. They didn't have any of this, you know, temporary. It was permanent. So I was assigned to the 756. And I figured, well, one of these days they're going to call me and I'll be going to Fort Knox. It never came through.
Oh.
And I went with the 756 and the 3rd Division. We landed in Africa, North Africa, Casablanca, a little place outside of Casablanca there. And we continued on through Africa. And when I got up to practically the end of the African campaign, my sister wrote me a letter from this house. Mary, she was alive then, and she said that the War Department had sent a bulletin. They didn't in those days do like now, and that I was missing in action in the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
So I knew then that all my records must have went to the Philippines. And here I'm in limbo up in, going around here waiting, and while I was in Fort Lewis, I used to go down and check at the, you know, our personnel section. When are they going to call me? And they say, well, just wait. You know, they'll call you when they get ready. Well, things started happening and they never did call. And then I found out later why they didn't call, because Fort Knox didn't have any records of mine. No history. So I was in Africa, and then everything started to change for me. I didn't ask for them, but they did. I was in the tank outfit. Well, the general that had in charge of the tanks, and in those days, tanks were number 2, infantry was number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so tanks did what the infantry told them to do.
I wish I could, but I gotta finish the interview. But thank you.
So
What would happen?
what happened then was I was in with this tank outfit, and we landed in Africa and took over Casablanca and that area. But when we did, we found out that we were fighting the Germans. They were our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But the Free French were fighting with them. They were with the Germans because France was already capitulated and was German.
Mm-hmm.
And then after about 3 days, they realized, heck, we're their allies. We're not their enemies. So then they quit, and they didn't oppose us.
Mm-hmm.
But it took about 3 or 4 days to do it. Well, in the meantime, we had shipped out, and we were going by all regulations and everything from World War I, because we didn't have a big war.
Yeah.
And in World War I guess they landed in England or someplace, and 3 days was all they needed, rations and ammunition and everything. Well, we got into Casablanca and it took us 9 days. So we were 6 days without anything.
Wow.
We had to rob, beg, borrow, and steal, and take it from the dead soldiers.
I think I've heard about this. They would give you 3 days rations for when you landed on the beach, correct?
Yeah.
So that you could, you had 3 days to clear the beach so that they could land supplies on.
Well, yeah.
And that was the purpose of the
well, the
3-day
thing
rations.
is, when you secured a beach, you mean you got to secure it so the cannons can't reach it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the LSTs can come in and drop their gates. And an LST, you could walk off of that and go into maybe ankle-deep water coming to shore. Mm-hmm. Well, if those LSTs can't come into the shore, why, you're stuck. Mm-hmm. Well, it took us 9 days to get our LSTs in. Mm-hmm. And boy, it was tough because, you know, without ammunition, you can't do too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And 3 days we used it up, you know. We figured we're going to get ammunition and get water and supplies. We didn't get it. Well, anyway, in Washington here, General Marshall, he was the chief of staff. And he found out then that